The Grand Astoria ballroom glittered with the kind of wealth that could buy silence. Diamonds dripped from necks and champagne flowed like water, each bubble a tiny, bursting symbol of oblivious privilege. Among the titans of industry and society swans glided Ava, her black uniform a stark shadow in the sea of couture. She was invisible, a ghost replenishing glasses of Dom Perignon. That was her job, to see, to serve, and to be forgotten. But from his throne-like chair on the mezzanine, Damian Sterling, the billionaire CEO of Sterling Global, a man whose whisper could collapse stock markets, was watching, and he was not a man who forgot. The weight of the silver tray dug into Ava's palm, a familiar ache that grounded her in the shimmering chaos of the Sterling Global Foundation's annual charity gala. The Grand Astoria's main ballroom was a masterpiece of opulence, its soaring ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers that cast a fractured, golden light over the assembled elite of New York City. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, rare orchids, and the low, confident hum of 1,000 conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and summering in the Hamptons. To Ava, it was another world. Her reality was the cramped, steamy heat of the service kitchen, the constant fear of spilling a drink on a $5,000 gown, and the dull throb in her feet from hours of standing. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her expression a carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality. Her job was to be a phantom, her movements silent and efficient, her presence acknowledged only by the brief nod of a guest reaching for a flute of champagne. She was good at it. She had to be. This job, along with her morning shift at a coffee shop in Queens, was the only thing keeping her and her younger sister, Sophie, afloat. It paid for Sophie's art supplies, for the rent on their tiny apartment, and for the mountain of medical bills left behind by their mother. Every sparkling glass she served, every discarded napkin she collected, was a small victory against the tide of debt threatening to drown them. "More champagne, Mrs. Vanderbilt," Ava offered, her voice soft and unobtrusive. The woman, draped in emeralds that probably cost more than Ava's apartment building, waved a dismissive hand without looking at her. "Just leave the bottle." Ava complied, her movements fluid as she placed a fresh, chilled bottle of Dom Perignon into the ice bucket beside the table. She caught a snippet of their conversation. "Sterling's new satellite network. Completely revolutionary. He's cornered the market." The name Sterling was on everyone's lips tonight. He was the host, the king in this castle of glass and gold. Damian Sterling. The name was a legend, a boogeyman in the corporate world, and a god among investors. Ava had seen his face on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal countless times. Sharp, aristocratic features, eyes the color of steel, and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. They said he was ruthless, brilliant, and intensely private. He never gave interviews, and his public appearances were rare, orchestrated events like this one. From her vantage point near a marble column, Ava could just see him. He wasn't mingling. He sat on a slightly elevated mezzanine overlooking the entire ballroom, a modern-day emperor observing his court. He was flanked by two severe-looking men in dark suits, his Praetorian Guard. He wasn't speaking to anyone, just watching the proceedings with an unnerving stillness, a glass of what looked like whiskey untouched on the table before him. He exuded an aura of such immense power and cold control that it seemed to bend the light around him. People didn't approach him. They were summoned. Ava's supervisor, a perpetually stressed man named Robert, hissed in her ear as she passed the service entrance. "Table 7 needs more canapes. And for God's sake, look alive, Ava. The last thing we need is a complaint." "Yes, Robert," she murmured, turning back towards the kitchen. As she pivoted, her tray now empty, her gaze inadvertently swept across the mezzanine again. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met Damian Sterling's. It was like touching a live wire. The entire ballroom, with its noise and its glitter, fell away. It was impossible, of course. He was 100 feet away, observing a room of hundreds. But she felt the weight of his stare, a laser focus that pinned her in place. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold indifference, yet his eyes held an intensity that was anything but indifferent. It felt like he was looking not just at her, but into her. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. She quickly broke eye contact, her face flushing with heat. It was her imagination, a trick of the light. A man like that wouldn't even register the existence of a waitress. She was part of the decor, as insignificant as the floral arrangements. Shaking off the unnerving feeling, she hurried back to the kitchen, the clatter and steam a welcome distraction from the billionaire's phantom gaze. She spent the next hour on autopilot, her mind a whirlwind. She served miniature crab cakes and caviar blinis, refilled wine glasses and cleared away plates with robotic precision. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a prickle on the back of her neck. Every time she re-entered the ballroom, she fought the urge to look up at the mezzanine. She told herself it was ridiculous. He was probably just surveying the room, and she had happened to be in his line of sight. Her break finally came. Ava slipped out onto a small service balcony, the cool night air a blessed relief against her flushed skin. The city sprawled below, a tapestry of light and shadow. Down here, the Gala was just a muffled thrum of music and voices. She leaned against the cold iron railing, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. She pulled out her phone to check for messages from Sophie. A picture of a half-finished painting, a vibrant splash of color. "How's the Shark Tank tonight?" the text read. Ava smiled. Sophie's art was her escape, her joy. It was the reason Ava worked 2 jobs and pushed through the exhaustion. "Don't let Robert catch you out here." Ava jumped, spinning around. It was another waiter, a young man named Ben. He offered her a tired smile. "He's on a warpath tonight," Ben said, leaning against the railing beside her. "Something about the wrong vintage of Chardonnay being served to the mayor's wife." "Sounds about right," Ava sighed, pocketing her phone. "Did you see him?" Ben asked, his voice low. "Sterling. Gives me the creeps. He just sits up there like a gargoyle. My cousin used to work security for him. Said the guy has ice in his veins. Fired an exec once for using the wrong font in a presentation." "I believe it," Ava said, the image of those steel-gray eyes flashing in her mind. "Well, at least the tips should be good," Ben said, trying to be optimistic. "Gotta get back in. Don't get caught." He disappeared back inside, leaving Ava alone with her thoughts. The encounter, as brief and distant as it had been, had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. It wasn't just that he was powerful or intimidating. It was the shock of recognition she thought she saw in his eyes. But recognition of what? A waitress he'd never seen before in his life? It made no sense. She took one last look at the city skyline, a world away from the gilded cage of the ballroom, and pushed the feeling down. She was being paranoid, exhausted. She had 2 more hours to go. She just needed to focus, get through the night, and go home to her sister. She was Ava, the waitress, insignificant, invisible. That was her protection. She squared her shoulders, smoothed her apron, and stepped back into the lion's den, ready to disappear once more. She picked up a fresh tray of drinks and began her circuit, deliberately keeping her back to the mezzanine, her eyes fixed on the task at hand. She would not look up again. She would not give him another thought, but she could still feel his eyes on her, a silent, heavy pressure that followed her every step. The final hour of the gala dragged on. The initial buzz of excitement had mellowed into a loud alcohol-fueled drone. Men loosened their bow ties, and women kicked off their painful heels under the tables. For the catering staff, this was the most grueling part of the night. The demands became less polite, the spills more frequent. Ava moved like a wraith through the thickening atmosphere of revelry, her smile fixed, her feet screaming in protest. She tried to focus on the small details, the intricate pattern of the lace on a woman's dress, the way the light caught a diamond earring, the clink of ice in a glass. Anything to distract from the oppressive feeling of being watched. But it was no use. The sensation was a physical weight on her shoulders, making her movements stiff and clumsy. She nearly dropped a tray of empty glasses when a portly man lurched backward, laughing boisterously. "Watch it, sweetheart," he slurred, not even bothering to look at her. "My apologies, sir," Ava mumbled, her cheeks burning. She quickly gathered the glasses and retreated toward the service station, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and humiliation. This was her place in their world, an obstacle, a piece of furniture that occasionally spoke. As she was stacking the used glasses, Robert, her supervisor, stormed over, his face pale and beaded with sweat. His usual air of frantic authority was gone, replaced by something that looked like raw fear. "Ava," he said, his voice a tight, strangled whisper. "Come with me, now." Ava's stomach dropped. "What is it? Did I do something wrong? Was it that man at table 9? She was already calculating the cost of a broken contract, the loss of this vital income. Robert shook his head, his eyes wide and darting nervously toward the mezzanine. No, worse, much worse. Just come on. And for God's sake, straighten your apron. He grabbed her by the elbow and began steering her through the throngs of guests, moving with a desperate urgency. Ava's mind raced. What could be worse than getting fired? Had she accidentally offended someone important? The mayor's wife? A senator? Robert was practically dragging her toward the grand staircase that led up to the mezzanine level. No, it couldn't be. Her blood ran cold. He was taking her to him. The guests parted before Robert's frantic charge, their curious gazes following the strange sight of the flustered manager towing a bewildered waitress. Every eye on her felt like a physical blow. The muted roar of the party seemed to fade until the only sound she could hear was the frantic thumping of her own heart. Why? Why would Damian Sterling, a man who could buy and sell entire countries, want to see her? They reached the base of the stairs, where one of the dark-suited security men stood, impassive and immense. He looked from Robert to Ava, his face a granite slab. "He's waiting," the guard said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured up the stairs. Robert gave Ava a gentle push. "Go," he whispered, his eyes pleading. "Just be polite. Don't say anything unless you're spoken to." He looked as if he was sending her to her own execution. Then he scurried away, disappearing back into the safety of the crowd. Ava was alone, standing at the foot of the stairs, the security guard's impassive stare boring into her. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her back. A hush had begun to fall over the section of the ballroom near the staircase as people noticed the unfolding drama. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd like a virus. "Who is she? What did she do? Is that Sterling's?" Taking a shaky breath, Ava placed one foot on the plush, crimson carpet of the first step. Each step felt a mile high. The air grew thinner, colder. The noise of the party receded further, replaced by an unnerving, focused silence. She kept her eyes fixed on the top of the stairs, not daring to look at the man who waited there, afraid of what she might see in his face. Her mind was a blank slate of terror and confusion. This had to be a mistake, a horrible, surreal mistake. Maybe he thought she was a thief. Maybe she looked like someone he knew, someone he hated. When she reached the top of the landing, the second guard stepped aside to let her pass on to the private mezzanine. The space was isolated from the clamor below, an island of quiet authority. And there he was. Damian Sterling sat not in a chair, but on a leather Chesterfield sofa, one arm resting casually along its back. Up close, he was even more intimidating than he was from a distance. The pictures didn't do him justice. They failed to capture the sheer force of his presence, the dangerous intelligence that burned in his steel-gray eyes. He was wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it like armor. He dismissed the remaining guard with a flick of his wrist. The man retreated to the top of the stairs, turning his back to them, but remaining a clear and present barrier to the outside world. They were alone. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe. It wasn't a lecherous look. It was something far more unnerving. It was analytical, searching, as if he were trying to solve a complex puzzle. Ava stood frozen before him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her tray long forgotten downstairs. She could feel the cheap polyester of her uniform, the scuff on the toe of her sensible black shoe. She had never felt so small, so out of place. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally he spoke. His voice was deep, a low baritone that was accustomed to absolute obedience. It held no warmth, only a chilling precision. "Turn your head to the left." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Ava's mind screamed at her to run, to question him, to do anything but obey. But her body, conditioned by years of service and a lifetime of being overlooked, complied before she could stop it. She slowly turned her head, exposing the right side of her face to him. Her heart was a trapped bird, beating frantically against her ribs. What was he looking for? He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. The intensity of his focus was terrifying. He was looking at her hairline, just above her right eyebrow. "Closer," he commanded. Her breath hitched. Swallowing hard against the lump of fear in her throat, she took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was standing only a few feet from the sofa. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. He could probably smell her fear, the cheap hairspray she used, the scent of kitchen grease that clung to her uniform. His gaze was fixed on that one specific spot. Ava instinctively knew what he was looking at. A scar, a tiny silvery white line, no bigger than a grain of rice, shaped like a perfect crescent moon. A scar she'd had for as long as she could remember, a faint imperfection that was usually hidden by her bangs. She'd always been told she'd gotten it from a fall as a toddler, a mundane childhood injury, but the look on Damian Sterling's face was anything but mundane. As his eyes locked onto the tiny scar, his mask of cold control shattered. For a fleeting instant, she saw something flicker in their depths. Shock, pain, and something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. His knuckles were white where he gripped the arm of the sofa. "Where?" he said, his voice now a raw, ragged whisper, a stark contrast to his earlier command. "Where did you get that scar?" The question hung in the silent air between them, heavy with unspoken history. And Ava, the invisible waitress, suddenly understood that her life, the simple, difficult, predictable life she had so carefully constructed, was about to be torn apart. This wasn't a mistake, and this man didn't just see a waitress. He saw something or someone he had thought was gone forever. Ava's mind went blank. The question was so bizarre, so intensely personal, that it short-circuited every panicked thought. All she could do was stare at him, her mouth slightly agape. "The scar," Damian Sterling repeated, his voice sharper this time, pulling her from her stupor. He stood up, a fluid movement that belied his size. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and his shadow fell over her, engulfing her completely. "Answer me." I don't know," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "My mother said I fell when I was a child. I've always had it." He studied her face, his expression a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The cold CEO was gone, replaced by a man haunted. "Your mother, what is her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Jensen," Ava replied, confusion warring with her fear. Why did he care about her mother? "She passed away 2 years ago." A flicker of something, disappointment, frustration, crossed his features. He began to pace the length of the mezzanine, his movements caged and restless, like a predator confined. The immense ballroom below, with all its power and wealth, might as well have been on another planet. Their world had shrunk to this small, tension-filled space. "Jensen," he mused, the name tasting foreign on his tongue. He stopped and turned back to her, his eyes pinning her once more. "And your father?" Ava flinched. It was a wound that had never properly healed. "I never knew him. He left before I was born." He stared at her, a long, unnerving silence stretching between them. He seemed to be piecing something together in his mind, arranging and rearranging facts until they formed a picture he could comprehend. Ava felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but she was trapped by the sheer force of his will and the 2 sentinels guarding the only exit. 24 years ago, he said, more to himself than to her. Blackwood Manor, in Connecticut. The name meant nothing to her. She shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I grew up in Queens. I've lived in New York my whole life." "Are you certain?" he pressed, taking a step closer. "Think. Does the name Blackwood mean anything to you? Or the name Anya?" The name hung in the air. Anya. It was pretty, ethereal, but it wasn't hers. "My name is Ava," she said, her voice firmer now, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. "Ava Jensen, and I think you have me confused with someone else." For a moment she thought he might believe her. He searched her face, her brown eyes the ordinary set of her jaw, looking for a ghost, but his gaze kept returning to the tiny crescent-shaped scar above her brow. "The fire we," he whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion so raw it startled her. "There was a fire at the manor. An entire wing was destroyed." He looked past her, his eyes unfocused, seeing a memory she couldn't share. "They told me everyone was gone. They told me she was gone." The pieces began to click into place in Ava's mind, forming a picture that was both terrifying and utterly insane. He didn't just think she looked like someone, he thought she was someone who had supposedly died in a fire over 2 decades ago. Someone named Anya, someone with a crescent-shaped scar. "I'm not her," Ava insisted, her voice trembling. "I promise you, this is a mistake." He ignored her, his mind clearly lost in the past. "Her mother, Her name was Katerina, a beautiful woman, a pianist. She worked for my father. She had that same defiance in her eyes. He looked at Ava again, and this time his gaze was softer, filled with a profound sorrow that momentarily eclipsed his intimidating aura. And she had a daughter, a little girl with wide, curious eyes and a tiny crescent scar over her right eye from a tumble she took on the garden steps. Ava's blood turned to ice water, a fall on garden steps. Not just a generic childhood fall, a specific detail. It was a detail her own mother had never mentioned. It was always just, you fell. Could it be a coincidence? A 1 in a billion chance? My head of security at the time, a man named Peterson, handled the aftermath. Damien continued, his voice hardening again as he snapped back to the present. He confirmed the casualties. He oversaw the arrangements. He assured my father that the matter was concluded. The final word was laced with venom. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. After a moment, he turned it and showed it to her. It was an old photograph, slightly faded and grainy. A man who was clearly a younger version of Damien stood with his arm around a stunningly beautiful woman with long dark hair. In front of them, held in the woman's arms, was a little girl of about 2 or 3. She was smiling, a gap where a tooth should be. And there, just visible beneath a wisp of dark hair, was a small, pale mark above her right eyebrow. Ava felt the air leave her lungs. The little girl, her face was rounder, her features softer, but there was no denying it. The eyes were the same shade of brown as her own. The shape of the smile was eerily familiar. It was like looking at a ghost of herself, a version of her that had never existed. That girl is Anya, Damien said, his voice low and intense. And the woman is her mother, Katerina. They both died in the fire that night. He lowered the phone. Or so I was told. Ava couldn't breathe. Her entire life, her identity, felt like it was fracturing, the solid ground beneath her feet turning to sand. Her mother, Sarah, a hard-working waitress who loved books and hated thunderstorms. Her life in Queens, a world of bills and subways and cheap takeout. It was all real. It had to be. This story of manners and fires and a long-lost girl named Anya was a fantasy, a delusion born of a billionaire's grief. I am not Anya, she said, the words feeling weak and hollow even to her own ears. My mother was Sarah. She wasn't a pianist named Katerina. This is a mistake. We will see, Damien said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He was already speaking into his phone, his voice reverting to the cold, commanding tone of a CEO. Get me everything on a woman named Sarah Jensen, lived in Queens, died 2 years ago, survived by a daughter, Ava Jensen, born 24 years ago. I want hospital records, birth certificates, social security numbers, school records, everything. I want it within the hour. He hung up and looked at her. The brief moment of vulnerability was gone, locked away behind a steel door. He was Damien Sterling again, a man who reshaped reality to his will. You're not going anywhere, he stated. My driver will take you to one of my properties. You will wait there until I have my answers. You can't do this, Ava cried, panic finally breaking through her shock. This is insane. You can't just kidnap me. I can and I will, he replied coolly. Consider it a temporary inconvenience. If you are who you say you are, an ordinary waitress with a coincidental scar, then you will be returned to your life with a generous compensation for your trouble. You'll never have to work another day in your life. He paused, his eyes drilling into hers. But if you are who I think you are, then your life was never your own to begin with. He gestured to the guard at the top of the stairs. Arthur, escort Ms. Jensen to the service elevator. Have David bring the car around to the loading bay. No one sees her leave. The guard named Arthur stepped forward. He wasn't aggressive, but his sheer presence was an unbreakable wall. Ava looked from him to Damien, a desperate plea in her eyes. But the billionaire's face was once again an unreadable mask of granite. He had summoned her based on a ghost of a memory. He had shattered her world with a grainy photograph, and now he was taking her. As the guard gently but firmly guided her away from the mezzanine and toward a hidden corridor, Ava cast one last look back at the ballroom below. The party was still in full swing, the music still playing, the champagne still flowing. No one had any idea that high above them, a waitress had just ceased to exist, swallowed whole by one man's obsessive, decades-old past. The ride was silent and surreal. Ava was bundled into the back of a black Maybach sedan with windows so heavily tinted that the city lights were just blurry streaks of color. The guard, Arthur, sat in the passenger seat, a silent, imposing silhouette. The driver, David, never once looked in the rearview mirror. They moved through Manhattan with an effortless speed that suggested a world without traffic lights or congestion, a world where paths were simply cleared. Ava's mind was a maelstrom. She kept seeing the face of the little girl in the photograph. Anya? The name echoed in the silence. It felt both alien and strangely resonant, like a forgotten melody. Could her entire life be a lie? Could Sarah, the woman who had tucked her in at night, who had held her when she cried, who had worked her fingers to the bone for her, could she have been someone else entirely? Katerina? It seemed impossible. Her memories of her mother were so vivid, so real. They were memories of a tired, loving woman in a small Queens apartment, not a pianist in a grand Connecticut manor. Yet the scar, the specific detail of the garden steps, it was a crack in the foundation of her reality, and Damian Sterling was prying it open with a crowbar. After what felt like an eternity, the car glided to a stop, not in a grimy back alley, but in a private, subterranean garage. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and expensive cars. David opened her door, and Arthur escorted her to a private elevator. There were no buttons to press. Arthur simply placed his thumb on a biometric scanner, and the elevator began its silent ascent. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was larger than Ava's entire apartment building. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking, panoramic view of Central Park and the glittering city skyline. The furniture was minimalist and modern, all clean lines and shades of white, gray, and black. It was less a home and more a gallery, beautiful and breathtakingly sterile. It was the physical manifestation of Damian Sterling's personality. "You will have everything you need," Arthur said, his voice as neutral as the decor. "The kitchen is fully stocked. The security system is comprehensive. Do not attempt to leave or use any communication devices. Mr. Sterling will be in contact when he has the information he requires." And with that, he stepped back into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft hiss, leaving Ava utterly alone in the silent, opulent cage. For the first few minutes, she just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer unreality of it all. She was a prisoner in a palace. She ran to the windows, her palms pressing against the cold, thick glass. The city was so close, yet so impossibly far. She looked for a latch, a handle, anything, but the windows were sealed sheets of flawless glass. She ran to the door where the elevator had been. It was just a seamless part of the wall now, with no handle or keypad. Panic began to set in, hot and suffocating. She had to contact Sophie. Her sister would be worried sick when she didn't come home. What would she tell her? How could she explain any of this? She frantically searched her pockets for her phone, but it was gone. Arthur must have taken it when she wasn't paying attention. Defeated, she sank onto a white leather sofa that probably cost more than her community college tuition. She buried her face in her hands, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to cry. The tears came in silent, racking sobs born of fear, confusion, and a profound sense of loss. She was mourning a life that, just a few hours ago, she had taken for granted. As her sobs subsided, a cold resolve began to take their place. She couldn't afford to fall apart. She had to think. If Sterling was right, if she was this Anya person, then her entire life was a carefully constructed fiction. But who was the architect of that lie? Her mother? And why? To protect her. From whom? From Damian Sterling? She started to explore the penthouse, not out of curiosity, but in a desperate search for answers, for a weakness in her prison. The kitchen was a marvel of stainless steel and technology, with a refrigerator that could probably launch a satellite. It was, as Arthur had said, fully stocked with gourmet food she didn't recognize. The bedroom was vast, with a king-size bed and an ensuite bathroom the size of her living room. In a walk-in closet, she found clothes laid out, simple, elegant pieces in her size, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored trousers. The sight of them sent a chill down her spine. It was as if he had anticipated her arrival, as if this contingency had been planned for. In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection in the large illuminated mirror. She pushed her bangs away from her forehead, her fingers tracing the faint, silvery line of the crescent-shaped scar. Had she ever really looked at it before? It had always just been a part of her, a minor flaw. Now it felt like a brand, a key to a life she had never known. She tried to see the little girl from the photo in her own reflection, tried to see a hint of the pianist named Katrina. But all she saw was Ava Jensen, a scared waitress from Queens, hopelessly out of her depth. Hours crawled by. The sky outside the windows began to soften from inky black to a deep pre-dawn purple. Ava hadn't slept. She had paced every inch of the penthouse, her mind racing through every possibility, every memory of her childhood, searching for inconsistencies. Were there things her mother refused to talk about? Gaps in the family history? Her mother had always been vague about their past, about where they came from before New York. She'd claimed they were from a small town in the Midwest that had no family left. She'd always seemed a little sad, a little haunted. At the time, Ava had assumed it was the grief of losing a husband, even one who had abandoned her. But now it seemed like something else entirely. Just as the first rays of sun kissed the tops of the skyscrapers, a panel on the wall chimed softly. Ava jumped. A screen flickered to life, and Damian Sterling's face appeared. He looked haggard, his tie loosened, and his hair slightly disheveled. He had clearly been up all night, too. "Good morning, Ava," he said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. Or perhaps it was something else. He didn't wait for a reply. "I have the preliminary results." Ava held her breath, her hands clenched at her sides. "There is no official birth certificate for an Ava Jensen filed in the state of New York 24 years ago." He began, his voice flat and clinical. "The one in the system is a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. It was created electronically 15 years ago. Your social security number was assigned at the same time. Before that, according to the United States government, you didn't exist." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Ava's feet. Not real. The documents that defined her, that made her a citizen, were fake. "Your mother, Sarah Jensen, is a similar story," he continued, his eyes locked on hers through the screen. "Her records, driver's license, social security, all trace back to the same origin point, 15 years ago. Before that, she is a ghost. There are no school records, no employment history, no credit history. It's as if two people were created out of thin air." "No," Ava whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true." "But the most interesting thing," Damian went on, ignoring her denial, "is your mother's medical file. She was treated for severe smoke inhalation and burns at a small, private clinic in upstate New York 24 years ago. The records were buried, paid for in cash by a third party. The patient's name was listed as Jane Doe. The fire, it was real." "It seems your mother was a very resourceful woman," Damian said, a hint of grudging respect in his tone. "She managed to disappear completely, to build a new life, a new identity, for both of you. She gave you a normal life, a safe one." His expression hardened. "She was protecting you, from my father, and from me." "I don't understand," Ava breathed, her mind reeling. "If you're right, if this is all true, who am I?" The cold, hard mask of the CEO returned, but his eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't decipher. It was a complex mix of triumph, pain, and a terrifying possessiveness. "You are Anastasia," he said, the name sounding both formal and achingly familiar. "Anastasia Volkov. And you are the sole heir to the Blackwood estate and the Volkov fortune, a fortune my family has been managing for the past 24 years. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Welcome home." The screen went blank, leaving Ava standing in the sterile silence of the penthouse, the name Anastasia echoing around her. She was no longer Ava Jensen, the waitress from Queens. She was Anastasia Volkov, a ghost returned from the dead, and the heiress to a world of wealth, lies, and danger she couldn't begin to comprehend. And her captor, the man who had resurrected her, was the one person her mother had spent a lifetime hiding her from. The revelation of her name, Anastasia Volkov, did not feel like a homecoming. It felt like an erasure. Every memory Ava had, every struggle, every small joy, was now cast in the shadow of this new, unbelievable truth. She wasn't just Ava. She was a lie her mother had constructed to keep her safe. The weight of that sacrifice, the sheer terror Katerina must have lived with every day, was crushing. Later that day, the elevator doors hissed open. Ava, who had been sitting numbly on the sofa, jumped to her feet, her heart pounding. It wasn't Damian Sterling. It was a woman impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon. She had intelligent, perceptive eyes and carried a leather briefcase. "Ms. Volkov," the woman said, her voice calm and professional. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I am Mr. Sterling's personal legal counsel. He has asked me to brief you." Ava stared at her blankly. "Brief me?" "On the legal and financial realities of your situation," Evelyn clarified, gesturing toward a glass dining table. "Please." Hesitantly, Ava sat down. Evelyn opened her briefcase and laid out a series of documents, her movements precise and efficient. She was the opposite of Damian's raw, emotional intensity. She was all cool, collected logic. "As Mr. Sterling informed you," Evelyn began, "you are Anastasia Volkov, the only child of Katerina Volkov. Your mother was a companion and musical prodigy under the patronage of Damian's father, the late Alistair Sterling. Alistair was your legal guardian after your father passed away, and the trustee of the considerable Volkov estate." The story sounded like something from a Gothic novel, not the reality of a 21st century girl from Queens. "The Volkov fortune," Evelyn continued, "was established by your grandfather, a Russian industrialist who emigrated after the war. It comprises significant holdings in technology patents, real estate, and a rather priceless collection of art and antiquities. Upon Alistair's death, stewardship of the trust passed to his son, Damian." "So Damian controls my money?" Ava asked, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "My money. He manages the trust, yes," Evelyn corrected gently, "a trust of which you are the sole beneficiary, a beneficiary who, until yesterday, was presumed deceased. Your reappearance presents a number of legal complexities." "What happened that night?" Ava asked, her voice a near whisper. "The fire." Evelyn's professional mask tightened almost imperceptibly. "The official report concluded that it was an accident, faulty wiring in the west wing of Blackwood Manor, where you and your mother resided. There were 2 fatalities, your mother, Katerina, and a child believed to be you. But my mother survived. She saved me." "So it would seem," Evelyn said, her gaze steady. "She must have been a truly remarkable woman to escape, injured, with a child, and then vanish so completely." There was a question hanging in the air, unspoken. Why? Why stage their deaths? Why run and hide for 24 years? "Alistair Sterling was not a kind man," Evelyn said, as if reading her mind. Her voice dropped slightly. "He was a powerful man, but his patronage often came at a high price. He was possessive, controlling. When Katerina expressed a desire to leave his service and raise you elsewhere, he forbade it. He viewed you both as his acquisitions." A cold dread washed over Ava. This wasn't just about protection from a distant threat. It was about escaping a gilded cage, one far more real than the penthouse she was currently in. "Did he start the fire?" Ava asked, the horrifying thought taking shape. Evelyn's expression gave nothing away. "As I said, the official report was an accident. Alistair Sterling died of a heart attack 5 years ago. What he did or did not do is now a matter of speculation." Her tone made it clear that her speculation was all but a certainty. "So my mother ran from Alistair," Ava pieced together. "But why hide from Damian too? He was just a boy then, wasn't he?" "Damian was 17 at the time of the fire," Evelyn confirmed. "He was away at a boarding school in Switzerland. He worshipped his father, but he was also deeply attached to your mother, and to you. The fire changed him. Alistair became colder, more ruthless. And Damian, he built walls around himself. He poured all his energy into building the Sterling global empire, as if to prove he was more powerful, more in control than his father ever was." Suddenly, the image of the cold, isolated billionaire watching from the mezzanine made a different kind of sense. He wasn't just a powerful man. He was a man frozen in time by a catastrophic loss. "Your mother would have no way of knowing what kind of man Damian would become," Evelyn concluded. "She would have only seen him as Alistair's son, an heir to the same possessive nature. To her, the name Sterling was synonymous with danger. Her only priority was to keep you safe and anonymous." Evelyn slid a document across the table. It was a last will and testament, Katerina Volkov's. It had been filed through an anonymous law firm years ago to be executed only upon confirmation of her death. "It's very simple," Evelyn said. "It leaves the entirety of the Volkov estate to her daughter, Anastasia, should she be found. In the event she is not found within 5 years of Katerina's passing, the fortune is to be liquidated and donated to various children's art charities. Sophie, her art supplies. Ava's mother, Katerina, had spent her life in poverty, scrubbing floors and waiting tables, all while sitting on a fortune just to keep her daughter safe. The sheer, selfless magnitude of her mother's love hit Ava with the force of a physical blow. The lie hadn't been a betrayal, it had been the fiercest act of protection. "So what happens now?" Ava asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Now we begin the process of resurrecting Anastasia Volkov," Evelyn said. "There will be DNA tests for public confirmation. Though Mr. Sterling is already certain, we will have to petition the courts. It will be a media firestorm. A story like this, a presumed dead heiress reappearing. It is the stuff of tabloid fantasy." The thought made Ava feel sick. Her private, quiet life was about to become a public spectacle. "And Damien?" Ava asked. "What does he want in all of this?" Evelyn paused, choosing her words carefully. "Damien has spent 24 years living with the ghost of that night. He has built an empire on a foundation of loss and control. Your existence, challenges that foundation. I believe he wants to rectify the past, to restore what was taken. In his mind, he is your protector now, the one who will give you the life you were meant to have. A protector who had kidnapped her and was holding her prisoner in a penthouse." The irony was not lost on Ava. "You will be one of the wealthiest women in the world," Evelyn stated, her voice bringing Ava back to the documents on the table. "You will have power, influence, but you will also have enemies. People who benefited from your absence. People who may not be pleased to see you return." The lawyer's words hung in the air, a clear but unspoken warning. The fire might have been 24 years ago, but the danger that ignited it might not have been fully extinguished. Alistair Sterling was dead, but the greed and ambition that surrounded men like him lived on. After Evelyn left, Ava stood by the window, looking down at the city. It looked different now. No longer a backdrop to her struggles, it was now a landscape of possibilities and threats. She was Anastasia Volkov. The name felt heavy, a mantle of wealth and history she wasn't sure she could bear. Her quiet life was over. The lie her mother had so painstakingly built had been shattered. Now she had to navigate a new reality, one populated by lawyers, hidden fortunes, and the ghosts of a tragic past. And at the center of it all was Damien Sterling, the man who had found her, the man who claimed to be her protector, but whose obsessive gaze felt more like ownership than sanctuary. The gilded cage had just gotten infinitely larger, but she was still trapped inside. The days in the penthouse bled together, a blur of managed confinement. Damien provided Anastasia with a laptop, curating a digital world of financial reports and corporate histories for her to study. He was educating her for the life she was to inherit, yet she felt more like a prized specimen than a person. Her old life, and most importantly her sister Sophie, were completely cut off. The isolation was a physical ache, a constant worry for the sister who would be sick with fear. Her frustration boiled over during their nightly video calls. "I need to talk to Sophie," she pleaded. "She must think I'm dead." "That is not possible," Damien replied, his tone as sterile as the apartment. "She is a security risk, a connection to your past that our enemies could exploit. I am protecting you both by keeping you separate." His logic was a fortress, and her desperation was mounting. If he wouldn't help her, she would have to help herself. A reckless idea sparked. She remembered Ben, the kind waiter from the Gala. It was a flimsy thread, but it was all she had. Driven by a desperate hope, she began exploring the penthouse computer, digging past the curated surface to its system files. In a digital work manifest for a catering delivery, she found his name, Ben Carter. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling hands, she scribbled a frantic note. "Ben, it's Ava. I'm in trouble. Tell my sister Sophie I'm okay. Tell her to be careful." She added Sophie's address, a huge gamble. With no other way to get the message out, she pried open the panel of the service dumbwaiter and taped the note to its underside, praying it would be found. For 2 days, silence was her only answer. Her hope curdled into despair. Her desperate ploy must have failed. On the third night, Damien's face appeared on the screen, but his composure was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. "You have been busy," he said, his voice a low growl. He knew. A waiter named Ben Carter recently quit his job after making a frantic call to a young art student in Queens. A young woman who then packed a bag and disappeared, just as some very unsavory men began watching her apartment. Anastasia stared, horrified. The men were connected to the Volkov relatives, the very people Damien had warned her about. Her attempt to help had painted a target directly on Sophie's back. "You put her in danger," Damien snarled, his anger breaking through. "My team is now looking for her before they find her." He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes blazing with a terrifying possessive fire. "You need to understand. I told you I would protect you, and that extends to her. But this ends now. No more secrets. From this moment on, you will do exactly as I say. In this world, I am your only ally." The crushing guilt over Sophie's disappearance vanished the moment Damien Sterling appeared in the penthouse. "She's safe," he announced, his usual polished demeanor replaced by the raw exhaustion of a two-day war. He explained everything with cold precision. His team had intercepted Sophie, saving her from operatives hired by their vengeful great-uncle, Gregor Volkov. But Damien's counterattack was far more devastating. "I've acquired controlling interest in his corporate debt," Damien stated, the ruthless CEO returning. "He is ruined. Tomorrow, he will stand beside you at the press conference and publicly welcome you, ending his family's claim and the threat to you both. Permanently." The sheer scope of his power was staggering, yet it had all been for her protection. Then he offered her something she never expected, a choice. "I am not my father, Anastasia," he said, a flicker of the boy from the past in his eyes. "The fortune is yours. Reclaim your life or walk away. You are finally free." The next day, Anastasia Volkov faced the world's media. With Damien by her side and a defeated Gregor Volkov smiling grimly for the cameras, she stepped out of the shadows. The invisible waitress was gone, replaced by a lost heiress who had been found. She was no longer a prisoner in a cage, but the queen on a complex chessboard. She had traded her simple life for a world of immense power, and for the first time, the next move was entirely hers to make. Ava's story isn't just about a mistaken identity, it's a gripping tale of how one person's past can violently rewrite another's future. From the glittering deception of the Gala to the cold reality of a gilded cage, she was forced to confront a truth more shocking than any lie. The line between protector and captor blurred, leaving her with an impossible choice. Does true freedom lie in reclaiming a powerful past she never knew, or in fighting for the humble future she always wanted? Her journey has just begun, and the most dangerous secrets of Blackwood Manor are yet to be revealed. What do you think Anastasia should do next? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of drama, mystery, and power captivated you, please hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves a good twist, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens when the lost heiress finally decides to take control.